I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today we are finally going to try to mix a brown, starting with primary acid dye colors. And I say finally because I've been meaning to do this for a while. I have done many different color mixing exercises over the years, and even when mixing 3 secondary colors together, we did get muted tones, but nothing quite brown. So can I take some of the information from projects I've done and create a brown color, starting with a cyan, magenta, yellow, and then maybe a black? I'm planning on using a lot of trial and error, but I'm also going to be keeping track of the recipes from each of the stages, so that way we can tweak and refine things as we go about this in a meandering kind of way. Before we dive into our color mixing project, I want to tell you about today's sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Alanna Wilcox's Color Alchemy Masterclass. If you don't want to go through as much trial and error and prototyping to get the color that you want, go to Alanna Wilcox. Alanna is an expert in color theory, color mixing, and dyeing. Alanna's masterclass, Color Alchemy, the Science of Color and the Art of Dyeing, the ultimate color theory and dyeing course that you can take from the comfort of your own home through 4 live Zoom sessions with Alanna herself. I have not taken the Color Alchemy masterclass myself, but I have taken one of Alanna's on-demand courses, the Creating a Digital Dye Notebook. And I've used Alanna's color matching in another video, and going from a physical object or digital image to a recipe that has the color that you want is incredible. And I truly consider Alanna to be the expert in all things color. The Color Alchemy Masterclass isn't about a specific brand of dye, but more about how to think about the colors and how to use them to get the color that you want. And this can be applied to any brand of dye. You're going to learn how to control your colors and anticipate what will happen when you make specific tweaks to your recipes, rather than saying, for example, green is half blue, half yellow, but not really understanding why. Alanna describes the Color Alchemy Masterclass as equivalent to a college course on dyeing, with an emphasis on synthetic dyes. Acid dyes are the main focus of the course, but dyers have taken what Alanna's teaching them and applied the color matching and things to cellulose dyes and have also had fantastic results there. The 4 live Zoom sessions in the Color Alchemy Masterclass cover color theory and creating a step-by-step plan to go from a digital image to a color palette that you want to use. You'll learn about organization and record-keeping strategies, so that way you can keep track of your dye recipes that you're developing and then can have reproducible results in the future. You'll learn how to create the dye formulas you need to achieve the colors that you want on your fiber. And then dyeing application and troubleshooting tips to help you see where you are in a project and then how to adjust to tweak your recipe or your technique to get the results that you want and the colors that you want. The Zoom sessions will be recorded, so you can watch them on demand later if you want to go back and revisit a particular part. Course participants get access to a private Discord for the duration of the course, with one-on-one access to Alanna to work through questions and help with the material. There is also a group for course alumni, so that way you have continued access to the community to ask questions and share projects going forward. Masterclass participants also get exclusive access to Alanna's book, Color Alchemy From Digital to Dye, and this book is a textbook that accompanies the 4 live sessions. Course participants also get some other fun goodies. You can learn more information about all of this on Alanna's website, which I do have linked at the top of the video description. Sessions run 3 times a year, with a spring, a summer, and a winter session. Check out Alanna's website for the most up-to-date information about when the next session will be running. You can register now for the 2023 summer session. I personally think Alanna is incredible to work with and that you can learn so much from her. But you don't need to just take it from me. Go to the website and see glowing reviews and testimonials from past participants of the Color Alchemy Masterclass. Alanna, thank you so much for sponsoring today's video. And now we're gonna go see if I can trial and error my way into mixing brown. Here are our primary colors. We have Caribbean Blue, Deep Magenta, Brilliant Yellow, and True Black. And in theory, with these 4 colors, we can create just about anything. And anything includes brown. I put on my deluxe rubber respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves to make 1% stock solutions of our primary colors. A 1% stock solution is 1 gram of dye dissolved in 100 milliliters of total volume. So I always will measure out the dye, add a little bit of hot tap water to dissolve it, and then slowly bring that up to the final volume. This is because the dye does add a little bit of volume to your final liquid. So if you were going to add, say, 100 milliliters of hot tap water to 1 gram of dye, your final volume would be a little over 100 milliliters. Today I started off making 300 milliliter stock solutions of each of our colors. So I measured out 3 grams of dye and dissolved it in a total volume of 300 milliliters. So that way we could use it for all of our color mixing. This should be plenty of dye, and then hopefully enough to dye a full 100 gram skein in the end. We'll see. You might have noticed that a tiny, minuscule little drop of blue went into our yellow stock. This is unfortunate, but I'm not starting over with the stocks for today or this video. Because ultimately, with the volumes that we're talking about, even with differences of 1 milliliter, that little drop isn't going to make a huge difference. And so we should still be able to get very reproducible colors if we follow any of the recipes that we create today. We are going to try to mix our brown in 2 different ways. One that I think will be easier, and one that I think will be a little bit trickier. The first way, we're going to focus on mixing in orange with black, because I've found in the past that mixing orange with black gives you a lovely range of brown colors. And so this is a starting place that we know we can do, because I've mixed orange in the past out of primary and we have black. And so I think we can go that direction and make a lovely brown. I think the second way, starting with 3 primary colors, is going to be a little bit trickier for me, because in the past when I've mixed these 3 colors together, we've had some beautiful muted tones from mixing all 3, but we've had, I guess the closest to a brown is a beautiful muted green. We have not yet achieved a brown not on purpose, by accident, or at least not where I'm keeping track of the measurements of everything. And so we're going to take information from these past 2 dyeing projects and apply it to our project today. Today we're going to be dyeing 20 gram mini skeins. This is the titanium sock from Wool to Dye For. It is 75% superwash merino wool, 25% nylon. It is a 2-ply. Now the yarn that we're going to probably dye at the very end is going to have a similar blend, but it will be a different yarn base. So if you're trying to develop a color recipe for one particular base and you care a lot about the depth of shade, I recommend taking that yarn and making your own mini skeins, so that way you can prototype on the actual yarn that you're trying to get that color for. But our purposes today are to try to get brown, and I don't really care very much about the final depth of shade. So I'm going to go ahead and pre-soak this yarn in some plain tap water for at least 30 minutes. When we're trying to mix a brown using black and our other colors, I think I want to start with this recipe with a ratio of 1 part black to 1 part orange. And I know from some of my other projects that an orange would be 3 parts yellow to 1 part pink. And so we mix this custom orange, we're mixing 1-to-1 with a black. We'll see how brown it is and if we need to edit this color further. So I have spots to make more recipes and edit as we go. As we start color mixing and dealing with small volumes, graduated syringes can be a really great way to measure your colors. The goal is to keep track of our measurements, so that way the color that we've mixed is a recipe that we can modify or start with in the future should we need to do that. And that means keeping track of how much of each color we're using. Making sure to give our dye stocks a good stir before I start measuring the colors. In this cup, I currently just have 1 cup of plain tap water. And we're gonna come in with 2.5 milliliters of deep magenta, 7.5 milliliters of brilliant yellow. And this might look rather red right now, but I promise it is actually quite orange. And finally to this, we're gonna add 10 milliliters of our True Black. And that's gonna make everything look very, very black right now. Well, actually, I will say we're looking fairly brownish, which is nice. And now to get a feel for this color, let's add in 20 grams of yarn and see where we are. I mean, this is feeling like a very, very great brown. So did we nail it right away? I mean, I don't know. There's pink leaning browns, there's purple leaning browns. Maybe we'll go ahead and mix up some other. But I think this is our easiest option. The easiest option is to create an orange and then add black to it. And that black is bringing in some of those blue notes. Now, the colors that we're creating might break, which means that we might see some separation of the various colors in there, but even so, this one feels very brown. Just for fun, I decided to make two more mixtures. One that would be a 1-to-1 ratio of black and yellow with 10 milliliters of each color, and then another that is 10 milliliters of black, 5 milliliters of yellow, and 5 milliliters of pink. Of these two combinations, the yellow and black is one that I've done before, I think with this exact yellow. And so this is almost green. I would probably, to make it feel more brown, I would probably want to add a little bit of some pink to it to bring it more this way. And then I'm curious, because I would say to mix a red, I would use 3 parts pink, 1 part yellow, and this one had a 50-50 mix. But this is feeling very berry to me. It is a muted color, a lovely color, but it's not feeling brown. I would call this one more purple and this one more green. Now, would they both fit in like a neutral capacity? Yeah. Is it possible for them to look different depending on what we've mixed with them? Absolutely. Now, what would happen if we still wanted a saturated color but wanted it to be less dark? So let's try using 10 milliliters of yellow, 5 milliliters of pink, and 5 milliliters of black. Now, yellow doesn't have, ooh, this might be a nice warm brown. Yellow doesn't have a huge impact always. Ooh, okay, this one feels more like a fawn brown, because I definitely did change the ratio of pink to yellow using a 2-to-1 instead of a 3-to-1. But all of a sudden with less black, we have something that is much warmer. It is still a little bit reddish, but I think it's also really, really quite beautiful. And we'll see how things look once things clear, but this one definitely is a very reddish brown versus feeling more burgundy. This one you could still feel like in the brown family. It is more terracotta, I think. Part of me wants to keep playing around with these mixtures a little bit more, but I want to move on and try to mix a brown without black using the 3 main primaries, because I feel like that's going to require a little bit more trial and error. We got a brown immediately, and we have some like adjacent things to think about how these might mix up. And who knows, maybe we'll do something in between there on a full skein later. Let's not forget that brown is a huge category of colors, and so the goal here wasn't to mix like one particular one. If I wanted a brown that was less dark, I could create this color but at a lower depth of shade using a total of 10 milliliters of dye. Or similarly, if I wanted to make this a little bit more brown, a little bit less orange, I could add a little bit of blue to it. And so we can take advantage of the color wheel if we wanted to try to edit these colors. And you don't have to stay within the 1% depth of shade. I could go and add a milliliter of blue to this, and then we'd have 21 milliliters of dye in here total. That would be totally fine. I'm just working on some ratios and proportions here. But I added 1 teaspoon of white vinegar to each of these cups, stirred it up, and then set them aside so that way they could sit for at least 24 hours to allow some of those dyes to slowly strike to the yarn. This cold process technique is one that I use a lot, and it's just a nice way to process multiple colors all at once. And after 1 or 2 days, if there's still color in the containers, then we can always heat set each sample in these takeout containers. These can be steamed without warping. I'm not starting out with no information when it comes to mixing the cyan, magenta, and yellow. We do have a color that is 2 parts yellow, 1 part magenta, 1 part blue that is probably the closest to a brown. It is a green, so we're not quite there yet. I think that if we add more pink to it, because if you think about a color wheel and how green and red are on opposite sides, I think if we add more pink and maybe a little bit more yellow, we can bring this color more brown. So we're gonna start by mixing our sample. That's 2 parts yellow, 1 part pink, 1 part blue. We're using 20-gram mini skeins, going for a 1% depth of shade. So this is the recipe of those 3 colors. And I thought about making 5 different recipes to try at first, but I think that I want to be able to see the color that we get. Even though it is still cold and so it's not going to be the final color on the yarn, I want to see if we're heading in the right direction by swapping out 1 of our milliliters of blue for another milliliter of pink. And we'll see if that sort of shifts us more in the right direction. In our 2 containers that each had just 1 cup of plain tap water, I added 10 milliliters of yellow, 5 milliliters of pink, and 5 milliliters of blue to one. And to the other, we did 10 milliliters of yellow, 6 milliliters of pink, and 4 milliliters of blue. Just a really, really subtle difference here. Now, we're expecting this first sample to lean green because if I didn't mess up, and my triad color mixing has some reproducibility to it, that is the color that we would expect. And I do know from experience that this color did break. Now, looking at it in person, it is very, very blue. Very pigmented, but still fairly blue. I'm curious how this next one is gonna go. I'm having a feeling that we might need to reduce the blue more, but let's see. Okay, we've got almost a gray. I mean, I would call this a brown. Wow. It's a very, very cool toned brown. It is not quite a gray, but I would like to make something that is less almost gray. I think I would like to reduce the blue even more. Oh, interesting. All right, let's make a sample that is 11 milliliters yellow, 6 milliliters pink, and 3 of blue. All right. I think, ooh. Oh, cool. This feels brown. Oh my gosh, I'm not sure how the colors might break, but, because I'm still seeing like a lot of pink in there. I don't know how much I stirred this, but we're getting more and more brown. Oh my goodness, I think this is the right direction, but I have an idea for one other version of this color. And so we're gonna try 12 milliliters of yellow, 5 milliliters of pink, and 3 milliliters of blue. Okay, bringing over our yarn. We're still not at like the orange proportion that we had used before. And, oh, I don't know, this one feels a little bit more green, which has me a little confused. I guess I thought by reducing the pink, I mean, it's brownish. We'll see what it does when all the colors absorb. It's also possible, yeah, this one, it's not feeling as green as this one, which has a lot of blue in it, but it's not feeling quite as brown as what we have right here. All right, we're gonna go in a slightly different direction for one more sample. And the next color I'm planning on mixing, and then we're gonna edit as we go. This we're gonna start with 15 milliliters of yellow, 4 milliliters of pink, bringing us closer to that 3-to-1 ratio, and then 1 milliliter of blue. I thought I was filming. So I started to say, and I did a tiny swatch that broke on a paper towel, is that this is a very sort of muted, dusty orange, but like when you get a sort of muted, dirty, rusty kind of color, that is a brown. It's sort of like a foxy brown, and so I feel like you might describe it as like a yellowish brown instead of a brown brown. Oh man. I mean, I'm gonna leave this one as it is just so that way we can see, but I'm really liking this. I would say of all of these, we have 3 that feel fairly brown. They're all completely out of order. We'll be taking a closer look at these once they have all absorbed color, but I'm gonna add a tablespoon of white vinegar to each, or a teaspoon, sorry, of white vinegar to each container. Stir them up, and we're gonna set them aside, but I'm super curious. It's also hard to say how things are because the yarn here looks very orange, but we still have a lot of green in the water because these colors are gonna break. Those blues are gonna bind slower than the other pigments. I think the yellows may strike a little bit fast. So I think the water on all of them is gonna feel, maybe it's the pinks that strike fast. The water on all of them is gonna feel a little bit green. And since things are a little bit crowded, that means that, again, we'll see some breaking, but I'm really excited to see how this comes together. Now for one final sample, and this one is a little bit out from the rest because I accidentally got a little bit of blue on the yarn. I want to do 15 milliliters of yellow, 4 milliliters of pink, 1 milliliter of blue, and 1 milliliter of black. We're gonna use all the colors in this one. I accidentally had some blue on my gloves when I originally picked up this yarn, and so I'm curious how this might compare to the last one. Okay, this is feeling so brown to me. It's again a warm brown, but I'm not feeling burnt orange as much as I'm feeling a nice warm brown. And so maybe the key, again, is to use all 4. And this is why printers and things, when you have a color printer, you're gonna have, what, the cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. So anyway, let's add our acid, and then we're gonna go sit number 10 aside with all of the rest of the colors. It's been 2 days, and let's open up these cups to see how they're doing. I have these colors arranged in the order that we mixed them. 1 through 5, 6 through 10. The color differences are hard to see right now, so I'm gonna remove it from the water. But these 4, I guess in 10, had combinations with black, and then these 5 were just the blue, yellow, and pink. But yeah, we're gonna remove them and see. The colors are so saturated, it may be hard to see differences until they're dry, and so I might end up wanting to label each of these individually versus trying to put recipes on the screen right now. But I would say my first impressions as I remove these, and this one has a hint of blue left. It's not bad, and I'm not gonna worry about it. My first impression so far would be brown, a little bit green, a little bit purple, a little bit orange, green. That one could be brownish. This one definitely feels brown to me. This one feels a little bit green. This one a little bit orange, but still in the brown realm. And this one is a very this one is probably the most just brown, not super cool tone, just sort of in the middle. If this one was a little bit more saturated, so instead of a 1% depth of shade, which I think we're at, if I had like 1.5 or 2, then this might feel close to a Crayola brown maybe. But I guess I don't know what color Crayola brown is. All right, I'm gonna remove the cup. We have a stunning palette of earthy tones here. I mean, I think that we did a really good set with these recipes. It's possible that we might decide we wanted to average some of these recipes. Like, this brown is a little bit warmer than the first one. This is a really good brown. And maybe like this brown averaged with that one could also give us, maybe feel a little bit less yellow and more, I don't know, what is brown if not yellow and orange and black and all those things combined, right? But clearly, these three feel relatively green. This one's a little bit red, that one's a little bit purple. But we do have these two I would probably only classify as brown, and then these ones, and even this purpley brown. This could be a purple brown, I don't know. I'm really happy with these colors and the fact that we have recipes for them. But I do want to see them dry because we'll be able to see a little bit more nuance between them before I try to replicate any of these recipes on full skeins. And so I'm going to actually label these individually with zip ties, and then I'm going to steam set this in a steamer basket for 30 minutes. Then we'll let the yarn cool completely so we can wash it. I can't get over how beautiful this color palette is, and it's just amazing when you consider how bright and vibrant our primary colors are. If you mix them, you can create gorgeous, gorgeous muted tones. I have a feeling I'll be referring back to some of these recipes in the future. And I'm glad I went through the effort of labeling them all. I figured if I grouped them in ways, it would be hard for me to put recipes up on the screen once the yarn is dry, and I wanted to be able to do that. Good news is no bleeding so far. I don't necessarily see a ton of color breaking either. Starting cold does have its perks. It makes it easier to distribute the dyes around on the yarn. But when we separate the colors, maybe we'll see some evidence of breaking, maybe not. But we'll just have to wait and see. But we're not seeing any color bleed, which is fantastic. Well, this is a lot of zip ties to manage all at once. So I'm going to finish rinsing out the soap, and then I'm going to put the yarn through my spin dryer, hang it up to dry, so we can look at the final colors and then potentially dye some full skeins. And here are the 10 colors that we mixed today using primary colors from Dharma's Acid Dye line. Now, of these, which ones feel brown? I'm going to remove the ones that are very clearly green. And now this one has a lot of green undertones and a lot of breaking to it. Let me zoom you in. The breaking that we see here and actually in the one next to it, it's all very, very subtle, but you see some patches that are a little bit more red and those that are a little more green. If you wanted more even color coverage, the first thing I would do would be to increase the ratio of water to yarn, but then I would also make sure to stir it more frequently and let it sit with the dye longer before adding acid, and then slowly lower the pH by adding more and more acid and then heating it. But you could also use something like Glauber salt to help you get more even color coverage as well. Now of these, we've got a very purple brown. I mean, next to purples, I would probably call this brown. Next to browns, I call it purple, but it reminds me a hair about espresso bean. This one reminds me a little bit of like Aztec gold or something. We've got gorgeous breaking on this last one as well. But actually, let me organize these a slightly different way and then we'll put up the recipes too. The simplest way, I think, to mix a brown, from what I've learned, is truly to go for combining black with an orange. And that orange you can make yourself, but we did see that it was really easy to go from, you know, an orange brown, but then to bring us to this muted purple or green, just changing the ratio of the colors a little bit. I think that if I wanted a more neutral brown versus like a cool toned brown or very warm toned or very reddish, I could work with the recipe a little bit more and play around with it, tweaking the proportions, tweaking the total amount of dye, and we could get there with a little more trial and error. But my goal today was not to achieve a very specific brown. It was to try to mix browns starting with primary colors. And we did do that. And so I am very happy I was able to achieve that. I just know that I think with more trial and error and more mini skeins, we could conceivably get there with this trial and error approach to try to mix a color. I am happy I took the time to write down these recipes today because this gives me a starting point for the next time I try to go about achieving a brown color. Because a lot of time when I'm mixing colors myself, and I tend to mix by feel, and then trial and error, add more water, add more dye, and then I get a mixture that is the color I want, but then I don't have a recipe. So if I need more of it, I can't go back and get it. I'd have to do the trial and error thing all over again. So sometimes it is worth using a more measured approach and keeping track of notes and recipes, so that way you aren't flying blind every time. Now let's go scale up this one. I did consider going straight with number 1, but I really do want to bring the 3 main primary colors and not the black in. I think I would like to play around using all 4 colors sometime to try to mix different brown shades using a combination of all 4, but we really just started bringing more blues into the mix, and so yeah, I'm not sure how necessary that is or what. So let's do number 7. I'm now gonna dye 200 grams of yarn that is 75% superwash merino wool, 25% nylon. And since these prototypes were dyed on 20-gram minis, it's really, really easy to shift the recipe. We just multiply everything by 10. So for our 200 grams of yarn, I measured out 110 milliliters of our yellow stock solution, 60 milliliters of the deep magenta, and then 30 milliliters of the Caribbean blue. I added this all to a large pot that was mostly full with just plain tap water, cold, and then I added the yarn in, stirred things around a lot. I did notice a little bit of breaking near the very beginning of when I added the yarn into the pan. I think some of the pinks might start striking a little bit quickly. I decided to just let the yarn sit in the pot cold for 20 minutes. Then I went to go heat the yarn on the stovetop. I brought it up to a simmer and let the yarn heat in the pot for 30 minutes. Then I removed the yarn from the pot, let it cool completely, and washed it off camera. Well, these samples are green. A dirty, mossy, brownish green, but they're green, and definitely greener than our original sample. Now, I was a little bit nervous because our yarn was broken and had green undertones to it. And in some lights, the full skeins that we dyed do look brownish, but because of the way that the colors broke, we have areas that feel very much more red than areas that are a lot more green. So I would need to put in some efforts to really try to even out the color coverage, specifically with the pink, but even so, maybe to get this color, maybe we would need more red in there overall. Now, since I didn't need a brown for something specifically, I'm not that upset. This color would require more tinkering and troubleshooting to get the kind of color that we mixed with our prototype and to prevent more color breaking. But we did learn that the easiest way to mix the brown out of primary colors would be to mix an orange and add black. That is the least challenging way, I think, to go about it. Looking at all of our samples, I think our full skeins are looking a little bit more like 8 than the 7, which was the recipe we used. And the main difference between the two was having, out of the 20 parts total, one has 1 part more pink, the other had 1 part more yellow. And so I think, again, our sort of perspective here is that if you have too much green, add more red. And that should help balance it out. So a little bit more pink would have probably tinkered this more brown. I do have to say, I love mixing neutrals. I really hope that you have enjoyed my trial and error way to mix a brown, starting with 4 primary acid dye colors. I think that there is still more tinkering that I can do, but I think we're headed in a good direction. I would like to thank Alanna Wilcox again for sponsoring today's video. Make sure you check out the Color Alchemy Masterclass for a professional course that will help you curate a color palette and then mix the colors that you envision. Alanna Wilcox is an expert in color theory, color mixing, and dyeing, and you will get live support to Alanna throughout the duration of the course, and access to an alumni group for continued support. I think that the Color Alchemy Masterclass is a fantastic way for you to really dive into color theory and learn how to achieve the results that you want with less meandering around. Alanna, thank you so much for sponsoring today's video. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and would you like to see me revisit the brown that wasn't a brown that I tried to scale up? I think that it would be easier to do more tweaks to that recipe now, because when I was dyeing mini skeins, I stopped my shifts at full milliliters. I could have gone down to half milliliters, but that can start to get a little bit harder to measure. However, once I scaled it up, it would be easier for me to, break things down even further. Yeah, would you like me to revisit this? Try to mix some of these colors more again? I am in love with all of these muted tones that we created, and I love that I kept track of the recipes, because there's so many times when I am trying to mix something specific that maybe I don't keep the best track of how things are going. And so then I have to trial and error to replicate that in the future. So it's great when I'm keeping track of things. And when I go through the trouble of putting the recipes on the screen so I can screenshot that and have it as a reference for the future. I know that future Rebecca is very, very thankful for editing Rebecca today. Please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. Thank you so much for watching.